Madam Speaker, with all of the challenges that we have in our country, the wonderful reality is that we still hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are all equal because they are all God's children. In fact, Madam Speaker, the essence of America is that all people should be treated with the same respect and protected completely equally under the law. To break up people into different categories and say that one group is more worthy of protection than another, and then to grant special protection to some groups and not to others, fundamentally diminishes the protection of all of the other remaining groups. But, Madam Speaker, a short time ago, this body voted to pass H.R. 1913, the Local Law Enforcement Hate Crimes Prevention Act of 2009, and I believe that it did just that. Madam Speaker, regardless of whether a person is white, black, handicapped, healthy, sick, old, young, homosexual, heterosexual, rich, poor, janitor, senator, a veteran, a police officer, a senior, or whatever the case is, they deserve equal protection under the law. That is the foundational premise of this nation. And the legislation that we voted on today moves us all directly away from that basic foundation in a profound and dangerous way. This legislation would prosecute individuals not on the basis of their crime, but on their alleged motivation for committing that crime. It requires law enforcement officials and prosecutors to gather evidence of the offender's thoughts rather than their actions and their criminal intent. Madam Speaker, this should strike us all inherently dangerous. The First Amendment of our Constitution was crafted because our founding fathers recognized that the freedom of thought and belief is the cornerstone of every other freedom. It is the foundation of liberty itself, Madam Speaker, because without it, every other freedom, including the freedom of speech, becomes meaningless. But, Madam Speaker, there is another insidious aspect of this legislation which I believe would have the most tolerant Americans up in arms if they were truly aware of it. And that is, not only does this legislation require law enforcement to investigate an individual's motivations, that is, the thoughts and beliefs that seemingly motivate him or her to commit a crime, but it would expand the scope of the prosecution to include individuals or members of organizations or religious groups whose ideas or words may have influenced a person's thoughts or motivations when they committed a crime. Under such a bill, individuals who may not have even been aware of the crime could receive the same similar penalties as the criminal himself. It would only take some arbitrary prosecutor to construe that an individual had influenced the beliefs or thoughts of a perpetrator of a crime and thereby somehow caused hateful or violent acts. And this raises the very real possibility that religious leaders or members of religious groups could be prosecuted criminally based on their speech, association, or other activities that have been specifically protected by the First Amendment of our Constitution for the last 220 years. Madam Speaker, this would have a devastating and chilling effect on free speech in America. And who could blame pastors, educators, or any other cultural leaders if they chose to cease expressing their beliefs for fear of being thrown in prison and charged with a federal crime? This is not a rhetorical speculation, Madam Speaker. It has already happened in the case of the Philadelphia 11 and other cases. In the Philadelphia 11 individuals were jailed and faced $90,000 in fines and 47 years in prison for simply speaking the gospel openly and publicly. One unscrupulous government entity plus the hate crimes legislation equals the perfect recipe for tearing away from American citizens some of the most basic constitutional rights in our nation's history. Advocacy groups and religious organizations will be chilled from expressing their ideas out of fear of criminal prosecution. In fact, Madam Speaker, chilled is probably a profound understatement. Many will simply be terrified and intimidated to complete silence. Madam Speaker, the fundamental purpose of this body is to protect the lives and constitutional rights of the American people, regardless of who they are or what they believe. Unfortunately, the hate crimes legislation will do just the opposite by granting unequal protections based on personal beliefs and thoughts, and it will endanger the constitutional liberties of millions of Americans. Thank you, Madam Speaker.